The bullet tore through the wooden sign above Ophelia Hartford's head, sending splinters raining down on her dark auburn hair. But she did not flinch as she stared down the three men blocking the entrance to her father's old trading post. She had learned long ago that showing fear in a place like Ash Fork, Arizona was as good as painting a target on your back, and Ophelia Hartford had survived too much to let a few drifters intimidate her now in the summer of 1878. "I said the store is closed," she called out, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Come back tomorrow when the sun is up, and I will sell you whatever supplies you need." The tallest of the three men spat tobacco juice into the dust and laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against metal. "We are not asking, lady. We have been riding for 3 days straight and we need food and whiskey. Now." Ophelia's fingers tightened around the rifle she held across her chest, the same rifle her father had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold it steady. She was 23 years old now, and in the 2 years since her father had died from pneumonia, she had managed to keep the trading post running despite everyone in town telling her she should sell it and find a husband to take care of her. The very suggestion made her blood boil. She had built calluses on her hands from hauling supplies, had learned to negotiate with merchants who thought they could cheat a woman, had proven herself capable time and time again. She did not need anyone to take care of her. "I do not care if you have been riding for 3 weeks," she said, lifting the rifle just enough to make her point clear. "The store opens at sunrise, not before." The shortest man, stocky with a scar running down his left cheek, took a step forward. "You are making a mistake, sweetheart." The rifle shot that rang out did not come from Ophelia's weapon. It came from somewhere behind the men, and the bullet kicked up dust right between the scarred man's boots. All three men spun around, hands flying to their pistols, and Ophelia's breath caught in her throat as she saw the figure emerging from the darkness beyond her store's porch light. He was the largest man she had ever seen, easily 6.5 feet tall with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the stars behind him. His hair hung past his shoulders, dark as midnight and tied back with a leather cord. He wore buckskin pants and a shirt that looked homemade, and even in the dim light, Ophelia could see the muscles in his arms flexing as he held his rifle with the ease of someone who had been born with a weapon in his hands. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, with a jaw that looked carved from granite and eyes that glittered like chips of ice in the moonlight. "The lady said the store is closed," the mountain man said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. "I suggest you three ride on out of here before I get unfriendly." The tall man tried to puff out his chest, but even Ophelia could see he was outmatched. "This is none of your business, mountain man. Why do you not head back to whatever hole you crawled out of?" The stranger took 3 steps forward, and those 3 steps were enough to make all 3 men back up instinctively. Up close, he was even more imposing, all corded muscle and quiet menace. "I am making it my business. Now move along." For a moment, Ophelia thought the men might actually be stupid enough to draw on him. The tension stretched tight as a fiddle string, and she found herself holding her breath. Then the tall man cursed under his breath, turned and stalked toward their horses. The other 2 followed, muttering threats that everyone knew they would not follow through on. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the night, Ophelia finally allowed herself to exhale. She lowered her rifle and turned to face the stranger who had just saved her from what could have been a very bad situation. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt anger rising in her chest. Anger at the men who had threatened her. Anger at the fact that she had needed help at all. Anger at this stranger for making her look weak. "I had the situation under control," she said, lifting her chin. "I did not need your interference." The mountain man looked at her for a long moment, and Ophelia felt heat rising to her cheeks under his steady gaze. Then, to her surprise, the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You are welcome," he said simply. Ophelia felt her anger flare hotter. "I did not thank you. I noticed." He slung his rifle over his shoulder and tipped his head in what might have been a nod of farewell. "Good night, miss." He turned to leave, and Ophelia found herself calling out before she could stop herself. "Wait." He paused but did not turn around. She swallowed her pride, which tasted bitter going down. "Thank you for your help, even though I did not need it." Now he did turn, and she could see amusement dancing in those ice-blue eyes. "Of course you did not. I am serious. I have been handling men like that for 2 years on my own." "I believe you." And the strange thing was, he sounded like he meant it. But there is a difference between handling 2 men and handling 3. Those odds were not in your favor. "I am a very good shot," Ophelia said defensively. "I do not doubt it. But even the best shot in the territory cannot stop 3 bullets if all 3 men draw at once." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You are Ophelia Hartford, are you not? The woman who runs the trading post." She blinked in surprise. "How do you know my name? People talk. They say you are too proud to accept help from anyone, too stubborn to admit when you are in over your head." He tilted his head slightly. "Seems like they might be right." Ophelia felt her face flush hot with indignation. "You do not know anything about me, and who are you to judge? You do not even live in town. I have never seen you before." "Gideon Fletcher," he said. "And you are right, I do not live in town. I have a cabin up in the mountains about 10 miles north of here. I only come down when I need supplies or when I hear there is trouble." "And you heard there was trouble tonight?" "I heard those 3 men talking in the saloon about how they were going to teach the uppity Hartford woman a lesson about refusing to serve them earlier today." His expression hardened. "Figured I should make sure you were all right." Ophelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I refused to serve them because they were drunk and causing problems. I have every right to refuse service to anyone I choose." "You do not need to justify yourself to me," Gideon said. "You were right to turn them away." The simple validation caught her off guard. Most men in town would have told her she should have just served the drunks to avoid trouble, should have smiled and played nice instead of standing her ground. "Well," she said, suddenly unsure what to say, "thank you again." "For the warning and for the help." Gideon nodded and turned to leave again, and this time Ophelia let him go. She watched his broad back disappear into the darkness, her heart still racing from the confrontation. Only when she could no longer see him did she go back inside and lock the door behind her, leaning against it and closing her eyes. She hated that she had needed help. Hated that people in town probably saw her as a stubborn fool playing at being a businessman when she should be home raising babies. But most of all, she hated the small traitorous part of her that had felt safe when Gideon Fletcher stepped out of the shadows, that had felt protected for the first time in 2 long years. That night, she dreamed of ice-blue eyes and a voice like distant thunder. The next morning dawned hot and bright, the Arizona sun already baking the dusty streets by the time Ophelia opened the trading post for business. She had been up since before dawn, taking inventory and preparing for the day ahead. Running the trading post meant long hours and hard work, but she had never shied away from either. She was rearranging the canned goods on the shelves when the door opened and Martha Yates walked in, the older woman's face already pinched with disapproval. Martha was the biggest gossip in Ash Fork, and Ophelia braced herself for whatever lecture was coming. "Ophelia Hartford, I heard about what happened last night," Martha said without preamble. 3 men threatening you right outside your store. You could have been killed." "Good morning to you too, Mrs. Yates," Ophelia said, forcing a pleasant smile. "How can I help you today?" "Do not change the subject, young lady. This foolishness has gone on long enough. A woman has no business running a trading post on her own. You need to sell this place and find yourself a husband before something terrible happens to you." Ophelia set down the can she was holding with more force than necessary. "This trading post has been in my family for 15 years. My father built it from nothing, and I will not sell it just because some people think a woman cannot handle business." "It is not about what you can handle, dear," Martha said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It is about what is proper. What would your poor father think, knowing his daughter was putting herself in danger like this?" "My father would be proud that I am continuing his legacy," Ophelia said firmly. "Now, did you come here to shop or just to lecture me?" Martha's lips pressed into a thin line. "I need flour, sugar, and coffee. But mark my words, Ophelia. Pride goes before a fall. One of these days you are going to find yourself in real trouble, and there might not be anyone around to save you." Ophelia gathered the supplies without responding, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. She wrapped everything carefully and handed the package to Martha, accepting payment with a tight smile. After Martha left, 3 more customers came in with similar lectures. By noon, Ophelia's temper was stretched thin as wire. Everyone in town seemed to have heard about the incident with the 3 drifters, and everyone had an opinion about what it meant for her future. She was sweeping the front porch when she heard hoofbeats and looked up to see a wagon rolling down the main street. Her stomach dropped when she recognized it as the supply wagon she had been expecting, loaded with goods she had ordered from Santa Fe. The problem was immediately obvious. The wagon was listing badly to one side, and when it pulled up in front of her store, she saw that one of the wheels was cracked nearly in half. The driver, a weathered man named Tom Bridges, climbed down with a grimace. "Sorry, Miss Hartford. Hit a bad rut about 5 miles back. This wheel is not going to make it much further. I can unload your supplies, but then I need to get this wagon to the wheelwright before it gives out completely." Ophelia looked at the heavy crates stacked in the wagon bed. There had to be at least 1,000 pounds of goods there, everything from bolts of fabric to sacks of grain to barrels of nails. "I can help you unload," she said, already rolling up her sleeves. Tom looked uncomfortable. "Miss Hartford, some of those crates weigh more than you do. Maybe we should wait and get some men to help." "I do not have time to wait," Ophelia said, climbing up into the wagon bed. "I need these supplies in the store today. I already have customers asking for half the things in this shipment." Tom opened his mouth to argue, but Ophelia was already dragging one of the smaller crates toward the back of the wagon. She had learned through hard experience how to lift heavy loads without hurting herself, using her legs and keeping her back straight. The crate still made her muscles burn as she lowered it to the ground, but she gritted her teeth and went back for another. For the next hour, she worked in the blazing sun, hauling crates and sacks from the wagon into her store. Tom helped when he could, but he was also trying to rig a temporary support for the broken wheel. Sweat poured down Ophelia's back, soaking through her dress, and her arms trembled with exhaustion. But she refused to stop, refused to ask for help, refused to prove the gossips right. She was wrestling with a particularly heavy barrel when a shadow fell across her. She looked up, squinting against the sun, and found Gideon Fletcher standing beside the wagon. "Need a hand?" he asked. "No," Ophelia said automatically, even though her arms were shaking so badly she could barely hold onto the barrel. Gideon did not argue. He simply reached out and took the barrel from her hands as easily as if it weighed nothing at all. He carried it into the store and set it down where she indicated, then came back out and picked up 2 crates, one in each arm. "I said I did not need help," Ophelia called after him, frustration making her voice sharp. "I know what you said," Gideon replied, already heading back into the store. For a moment, Ophelia considered making a scene. Then she looked at the dozen crates still waiting to be unloaded, felt her exhausted muscles protesting, and swallowed her pride. If this stubborn mountain man wanted to help despite her protests, she was not going to fight him on it. Working together, they had the wagon unloaded in less than 20 minutes. Gideon moved with efficient ease, his powerful body making short work of even the heaviest loads. Ophelia tried not to stare at the way his muscles flexed beneath his shirt, tried not to notice how his long hair swung against his shoulders as he moved. This was just help, nothing more. She would not read anything into it. When the last crate was inside, Tom thanked them both and headed off to the wheelwright, leaving Ophelia alone with Gideon in the dimness of her store. She was acutely aware of how she must look, her dress damp with sweat and her hair falling out of its pins. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "I appreciate your help, even though I would have managed fine on my own." "Would you?" Gideon asked, and there was no mockery in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "How many more hours would it have taken you? And what would you have done if you had hurt yourself trying to lift something too heavy?" "I have been managing this store on my own for 2 years," Ophelia said, her defenses rising automatically. "I know my own limits." "Do you?" He gestured to her hands, and she looked down to see that her palms were bleeding from rope burns. She had not even noticed. "Or do you just push past them because you are so determined to prove you do not need anyone?" Anger flared hot in her chest. "You do not know anything about what I need or do not need. You do not know what it is like to have everyone in town telling you that you are not good enough, that you should give up and let a man handle things. I have to work twice as hard as any man just to be taken half as seriously." "You are right," Gideon said quietly. "I do not know what that is like. But I do know what it is like to be so determined to be independent that you cut yourself off from everyone around you, to be so afraid of being seen as weak that you refuse help even when you need it." His words hit too close to home, and Ophelia felt something crack inside her chest. "Why do you care?" she demanded. "Why do you keep showing up to help me when I have made it clear I do not want your interference?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "Because I see someone who is drowning but will not grab the rope thrown to her. Because accepting help is not the same as admitting defeat. And because I know what it is like to be alone, and I would not wish that on anyone." The honesty in his voice stripped away her anger, leaving her feeling raw and exposed. She turned away, busying herself with organizing the newly delivered supplies so he would not see the tears stinging her eyes. "I am not a charity case," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never thought you were." She heard him move toward the door, then pause. "For what it is worth, Miss Hartford, I think you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. But strength does not mean doing everything alone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone stand beside you." Then he was gone, leaving Ophelia standing alone among the crates and barrels, her heart pounding and her mind reeling. She sank down onto a crate and finally let the tears fall, crying for reasons she could not fully name. For the loneliness she had been denying. For the exhaustion of always having to prove herself. For the terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, Gideon Fletcher was right. Over the next week, Ophelia did not see Gideon, though she found herself looking for him more often than she cared to admit. She threw herself into her work with renewed determination, rising even earlier and staying up even later. She told herself she was just being productive, but deep down she knew she was trying to outrun the feelings that Gideon's words had stirred up. On Saturday morning, she was taking inventory in the back room when she heard the front door open. She emerged to find Sheriff John Kendrick standing in her store, his hat in his hands and concern written across his weathered face. "Morning, Ophelia," he said. "Wanted to check in on you. Heard you had some trouble last week." "I am fine, Sheriff," Ophelia assured him. "Nothing I could not handle. Heard you had help handling it." The sheriff gave her a meaningful look. "Gideon Fletcher is a good man, but he is not always around. You might want to think about getting yourself some regular protection." "I have a rifle and I know how to use it," Ophelia said. "I do not need protection," the sheriff sighed. "Ophelia, I know you have got a lot of pride. Your father did too, but pride will not stop a bullet. Those 3 men who came by last week, they are part of a bigger gang that has been causing trouble all up and down the territory. If they come back with more friends, you are going to be in serious danger." A chill ran down Ophelia's spine, but she kept her expression neutral. "Then I will deal with that if it happens. Sometimes I wonder if you inherited your father's stubbornness along with his store," the sheriff muttered. "Just promise me you will be careful, and if you see those men again, you send for me right away. Understood?" "Understood," Ophelia agreed, though they both knew she would handle things her own way. After the sheriff left, Ophelia tried to focus on her work, but his words kept echoing in her mind. She had known the 3 men were dangerous but part of a larger gang. That changed things. Still, what was she supposed to do? Sell the store and run away? Let fear dictate her life? She was still mulling it over that afternoon when a family came into the store, parents with 3 small children. The woman looked exhausted, her dress dusty from travel, and the man's face was tight with worry. "We are heading west to California," the man explained as they gathered supplies. "But we have had some setbacks. Lost one of our horses and had to replace our wagon wheel. Money is getting tight." Ophelia could see the calculation in his eyes as he looked at the supplies they had gathered, clearly trying to figure out what they could afford. The children looked hungry, their eyes lingering on the jars of candy on the counter. Without thinking twice, Ophelia began wrapping their goods. "That will be $5, she said, naming a price she knew was less than half what the supplies were actually worth. The man's eyes widened. "Are you sure? That seems low." "I am sure," Ophelia said firmly. "Safe travels to you and your family." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are an angel." After they left, Ophelia added 3 sticks of peppermint candy to the package, knowing the children would find them later. It was not the first time she had given people breaks on prices or added little extras when she knew they were struggling. Her father had taught her that sometimes being a good businesswoman meant being a good human being first. She was locking up that evening when she heard footsteps on the porch and looked up to see Gideon Fletcher standing there, a burlap sack in his hands. "Brought you something," he said, holding out the sack. Ophelia took it cautiously and looked inside to find fresh venison already butchered and wrapped. "What is this for? Figured you could use it. Hunting has been good lately and I had extra." "I cannot accept this," Ophelia said automatically, trying to hand the sack back. "I do not take charity." "It is not charity," Gideon said, his voice patient. "It is a gift. There is a difference." "What is the difference?" "Charity implies you cannot take care of yourself. A gift is given freely because someone wants to do something nice for you. No strings attached, no judgment involved." Ophelia looked down at the venison, her throat tight. She had not had fresh meat in weeks, always selling it in the store rather than keeping it for herself. "I do not know what to say." "Say thank you and accept it. That is all." Gideon leaned against the porch railing, his long frame relaxed. "You know, I heard something interesting in town today." Heard about a certain store owner who charged a traveling family about a third of what their supplies were worth. Heard she has a habit of doing things like that. Ophelia felt heat rise to her cheeks. That is different. How is it different? They needed help. They were struggling. And you do not think you ever struggle. You do not think you ever need help. Gideon's blue eyes were steady on her face. Why is it noble when you help others but weakness when you accept help yourself? The question landed like a punch to the gut. Ophelia opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. She had no answer. I see what you do, Gideon continued softly. I see how hard you work, how much you give to this community. I see you helping people who need it without a second thought. But you have built such high walls around yourself that you cannot see when someone is trying to do the same for you. I have to have walls, Ophelia said, and was horrified to hear her voice crack. If I do not, people will think I am weak. They will try to take everything I have worked for. Not everyone, Gideon said. Some people just want to help because they care, because they see someone worth caring about. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ophelia's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. Why me? She whispered. Why do you care about helping me? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he straightened up from the railing and took a step closer. In the fading light, his face was all shadows and angles, but his eyes were warm. Because you remind me of myself, a few years back, he said. I spent years living alone in those mountains, convinced I did not need anyone, convinced that needing people made you weak, but all it did was make me lonely. I do not want to see you make the same mistake. What changed? Ophelia asked. For you, I mean. I realized that there is a difference between being independent and being isolated. That accepting help does not mean giving up control. And that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you are not invincible. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently took her hand. Her breath caught as his calloused fingers brushed over the rope burns on her palms. These are not badges of honor, Ophelia. They are signs that you are pushing yourself too hard. I do not know how to do it differently, she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I do not know how to be strong and still accept help, how to run this business without people thinking I cannot handle it on my own. You start by trusting that the right people will understand, that they will not see you as weak, but as human. His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. And maybe you let someone stand beside you just to see what it feels like. Ophelia looked up at him, at this mountain man who had appeared in her life like some frontier guardian angel. She had spent 2 years keeping everyone at arm's length, and she was so tired. Tired of being strong all the time. Tired of never letting her guard down. Tired of being alone. I do not even know you, she said, but her hand did not pull away from his. Then let me fix that. Have dinner with me tomorrow. Just dinner, nothing more. We can talk, get to know each other. No expectations, no pressure. Every instinct Ophelia had screamed at her to say no, to protect herself, to maintain her distance. But there was something in Gideon's eyes that made her want to take a chance. Something that made her think maybe, just maybe, he really did understand. All right, she heard herself say. Dinner tomorrow. Gideon's face lit up with a smile that transformed his rugged features, making him look younger and more approachable. Good. I will pick you up at 6. After he left, Ophelia stood on her porch holding the sack of venison and wondering what she had just agreed to. She was terrified and excited in equal measure, her heart racing with possibilities she had not allowed herself to consider in years. That night, she cooked some of the venison for dinner, and it was the best meal she had eaten in months. As she ate, she thought about what Gideon had said about gifts versus charity, about accepting help versus admitting weakness. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had been so focused on being independent that she had forgotten how to simply be. The next day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Ophelia caught herself checking her reflection in the window multiple times, fussing with her hair and smoothing her dress. She felt like a foolish girl instead of a grown woman who ran her own business, but she could not seem to help herself. At exactly 6 o'clock, Gideon appeared on her porch. He had cleaned up, his long hair freshly washed and tied back, wearing clean clothes that somehow made his muscular frame even more impressive. In his hands was a bouquet of wildflowers, bright splashes of color against his tanned skin. "These are for you," he said, holding them out with an almost boyish awkwardness that made her smile. "They are beautiful," Ophelia said, accepting the flowers. "Let me just put these in water." She arranged the flowers in a mason jar while Gideon waited patiently. When she came back out, he offered her his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His muscles were solid as granite beneath her fingers, and she felt small beside his towering frame, though not in a bad way. Protected, she realized. She felt protected. He led her to where his horse waited, a massive bay gelding that matched his owner's impressive size. "I thought we could ride out to a spot I know, if you are comfortable with that." "I grew up on a horse," Ophelia said. "I can ride." Gideon mounted first, then reached down to pull her up behind him. Ophelia settled onto the horse's back, her arms wrapping around Gideon's waist. She could feel the heat of his body through his shirt, could smell pine and leather and something indefinably masculine. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They rode out of town as the sun began its descent, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold. Gideon guided the horse along a trail that wound up into the foothills, and Ophelia found herself relaxing against his broad back, enjoying the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. After about 30 minutes, they emerged into a clearing that overlooked the valley below. The view was breathtaking, the desert landscape spread out like a patchwork quilt in the fading light. A small creek bubbled nearby, and someone had clearly been here before because there was a fire ring and a neat stack of wood. "This is beautiful," Ophelia breathed as Gideon helped her down from the horse. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Gideon said. "It is peaceful. Figured it would be a good place for dinner." He had brought a basket packed with food, bread and cheese, dried fruit, and even a bottle of wine. As he built a fire and laid out their meal, Ophelia found herself watching the easy way he moved, the confidence in every gesture. This was a man completely comfortable in his own skin, unbothered by what anyone else thought of him. "Tell me about yourself," she said as they settled by the fire. "Everyone in town knows you as the mysterious mountain man, but that is all I really know." Gideon was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Not much to tell. I came out west about 5 years ago after the war, wanted to get away from people, from civilization, built myself a cabin up in the mountains and have been living there ever since." "The war," Ophelia repeated softly. Many men in the territory were veterans, carrying scars both visible and invisible. "That must have been hard." "It was." His jaw tightened. "I saw things no person should have to see. Did things I am not proud of. When it was over, I just wanted peace and quiet. Wanted to be somewhere I did not have to worry about watching my back all the time." "Is that why you live alone? Because of what you saw in the war?" "Partly. Also because I never was much for crowds. I grew up in the mountains of Tennessee, learned to hunt and trap from my father. The wilderness feels more like home to me than any town ever could." He looked over at her, firelight dancing in his eyes. "What about you? How did you end up running a trading post in Ash Fork?" Ophelia took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "My father started the trading post when I was 8 years old. My mother had died the year before, and he wanted a fresh start. He taught me everything about running a business, treated me like a son in some ways. When he died 2 years ago, it seemed natural that I should take over." She paused. "Everyone else thought I was crazy, still do, because you are a woman. Because I am a woman who refuses to know her place." Ophelia could not keep the bitterness from her voice. "I get lectures every single day about how I should sell the store, find a husband, have babies. As if that is all a woman is good for. You do not want those things." "I did not say that." Ophelia stared into the fire, trying to put her feelings into words. "I am not opposed to marriage or children, but I want them on my terms, not because society says I should. I want a partner, not a caretaker, someone who sees me as an equal, not a burden to be managed." "That is not unreasonable," Gideon said. "Most men think it is. Most men want a woman who will defer to them, who will not challenge them or have opinions of her own." She looked at him. "What about you? What do you want?" Gideon was quiet for so long that Ophelia thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I want someone real. Someone who says what they mean and does not play games. Someone strong enough to stand on their own but willing to let me stand beside them." His eyes met hers. "Someone like you." Ophelia's breath caught. "You do not know me well enough to say that." "Maybe not. But I know what I have seen. I have seen you work yourself to exhaustion rather than admit you need help. I have seen you give away goods to people who need them more than you do. I have seen you stand up to men twice your size without flinching. And I have seen the way you carry the weight of everyone's expectations without complaint." He reached out and took her hand. "I see you, Ophelia, the real you. And I like what I see." Tears pricked at Ophelia's eyes. When was the last time someone had really seen her? Not the stubborn woman who refused help, not the tragic daughter trying to live up to her father's legacy, but just her, just Ophelia. "I am scared," she admitted. "I have spent so long building walls around myself that I do not know how to let them down." "Then do not let them all down at once. Just let me in a little bit. We can take it slow." Gideon's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I am not going anywhere." They talked for hours as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. Gideon told her about his life in the mountains, about the wildlife he encountered, and the peace he found in solitude. Ophelia found herself opening up in ways she never had before, telling him about her fears and frustrations, about the loneliness of being constantly judged and found wanting. As the night grew cold, Gideon draped his jacket around her shoulders. It smelled like him, and Ophelia found herself pulling it tighter, savoring the warmth and comfort it provided. They sat close together by the dying fire, and somewhere along the way, Ophelia's head found its way to Gideon's shoulder. His arm came around her, solid and reassuring, and for the first time in 2 years she felt like she could breathe. "I should get you back," Gideon said eventually, his voice reluctant. "You have to open the store early tomorrow." "I do not want this night to end," Ophelia said, then immediately felt foolish. But Gideon just pulled her a little closer. "It does not have to. We can do this again, as many times as you want." On the ride back to town, Ophelia held onto Gideon a little tighter. When they reached her store, he helped her down and walked her to her door like a proper gentleman. In the moonlight, his face was all shadows and angles, impossibly handsome. "Thank you for tonight," Ophelia said. "I had a wonderful time. So did I." Gideon reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Can I see you again?" "Yes," Ophelia said without hesitation. "I would like that very much." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and sweet, but it sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Good night, Ophelia," he murmured. "Good night, Gideon." She watched him ride away into the darkness, her hand pressed to her forehead where his lips had been. Her heart was full to bursting, hope and fear tangled together in equal measure. She was terrified of what this might mean, of how it might change her carefully ordered life. But she was also more alive than she had felt in years. That night, she fell asleep still wearing his jacket, breathing in the scent of pine and leather and dreaming of ice-blue eyes. The next few weeks passed in a blur of stolen moments and growing connection. Gideon came into town 3 or 4 times a week, always finding reasons to stop by the trading post. Sometimes he helped her with heavy lifting or difficult customers. Sometimes he just sat on a crate and talked to her while she worked. And sometimes, when the store was empty, he would pull her into his arms and kiss her until she forgot her own name. Ophelia found herself looking forward to his visits with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. She had never felt this way about anyone before, had never understood what it meant to miss someone so much that their absence was a physical ache. But Gideon had somehow slipped past all her defenses, and now she could not imagine her life without him in it. The town, of course, noticed. Gossip spread like wildfire through Ash Fork, and Ophelia found herself on the receiving end of countless knowing looks and pointed comments. Martha Yates cornered her in the general store one afternoon, her eyes gleaming with malicious curiosity. "I see you have been spending time with that mountain man," Martha said. "People are talking, you know, saying it is not proper for an unmarried woman to be seen with a man so much." "People should mind their own business," Ophelia replied coolly, though her heart was pounding with anger and embarrassment. "I am just saying, dear, you need to be careful about your reputation. Men do not marry women who give away the milk for free, if you know what I mean." Ophelia's temper snapped. "Mrs. Yates, I am 23 years old and I run my own business. I do not need lectures from you or anyone else about how to conduct my life. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." She walked away before Martha could respond, her hands shaking with suppressed fury. It was not fair. If she was a man, no one would question her spending time with a woman. But because she was female, everything she did was subject to scrutiny and judgment. That evening, Gideon found her sitting on her porch steps, still fuming about Martha's comments. He took one look at her face and sat down beside her. "What happened?" he asked. Ophelia told him about Martha's words, about the constant gossip and judgment. "I am so tired of it," she finished. "Tired of always having to justify myself. Tired of people acting like I am doing something wrong just by living my life." Gideon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you care what they think?" "I do not want to care, but their opinions affect my business. If people think I am improper, they might stop shopping at the trading post. Then maybe we should give them something real to talk about." Gideon turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Marry me, Ophelia." Ophelia's heart stopped. "What, marry me?" he repeated. "I know it is fast. I know we have only been seeing each other for a few weeks, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you." "Gideon, Ophelia's mind was reeling. Marriage. He was asking her to marry him. "I do not know what to say." "Say yes. Say you will let me be your partner, not your caretaker. Say you will let me help you carry the burdens you have been carrying alone for so long." His blue eyes were intense on her face. "I am not asking you to give up your independence or your store. I am just asking you to let me share your life." Ophelia's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself, to maintain her careful control. But then she looked at Gideon, really looked at him. At this man who had shown her again and again that accepting help was not weakness, who had seen past her prickly exterior to the lonely woman beneath. who had made her laugh and made her feel safe and made her believe that maybe she deserved to be happy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Gideon's face split into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and passionate, pouring all his feeling into the gesture. Ophelia kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms wrapping around his neck, her fingers tangling in his long hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man in the territory." "I hope you know what you are getting into," Ophelia said, suddenly nervous. "I am not easy to live with. I am stubborn and proud, and I do not always know when to ask for help." "I know exactly what I am getting into," Gideon assured her, "and I would not change a thing about you." They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Ash Fork. Ophelia wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved for years, and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers. Gideon wore his best clothes and looked so handsome that Ophelia's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her at the altar. Most of the town turned out for the wedding, though Ophelia suspected it was more out of curiosity than genuine well-wishing. She did not care. All that mattered was Gideon, standing tall and strong beside her, his hand clasping hers as they exchanged vows. "I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you," Gideon said, his deep voice carrying through the small church. "To support your dreams and your independence. To be your partner in all things." Ophelia's voice shook as she made her own vows. "I promise to let you help me carry my burdens, to trust that accepting help is not weakness, to believe that I am worthy of love and support." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Gideon kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. She heard Martha Yates sniff disapprovingly somewhere behind her, and could not help but smile against Gideon's lips. After the ceremony, there was a small reception at the trading post. Ophelia had insisted on keeping it simple, and Gideon had agreed without argument. As they moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, Ophelia felt like she was floating. She was married. She had a partner now, someone to share her life with. That night, after all the guests had left, Gideon carried her over the threshold of her small house behind the trading post. It was the first time he had been inside, and he looked around with interest at the modest but comfortable space. "This will do for now," he said. "But eventually I would like to build us a bigger house, something with room to grow." "Room to grow," Ophelia repeated, raising an eyebrow. Gideon pulled her into his arms, his blue eyes warm. "I want children with you, Ophelia. Not right away if you are not ready, but someday. I want to build a life with you, a real life." Ophelia felt tears sting her eyes. A year ago, she would have said she did not have time for children, that she was too busy running the store. But now, looking up at her husband, she found herself imagining a future filled with the laughter of children, with a house full of love and warmth. "Someday," she agreed, "when we are ready." Gideon kissed her then, and the kiss quickly deepened, becoming heated and urgent. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all and carried her to the bedroom. As he laid her down on the bed and began unlacing her dress with gentle, reverent hands, Ophelia felt the last of her walls crumble. She was vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to be before, but she was not afraid. Not with Gideon. Never with Gideon. That night, they became husband and wife in every sense of the word. Gideon was tender and passionate, taking his time to learn every inch of her body to discover what made her gasp and moan. Ophelia had never felt so cherished, so desired. When they finally came together, it was with a sense of rightness that made her cry tears of joy. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Gideon traced lazy patterns on her skin. "I love you," he murmured. I should have said it before, but I love you, Ophelia." "I love you too," Ophelia whispered back, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. She had never said them to anyone before, but with Gideon, they came naturally. "I did not think I could love anyone, but then you showed up and changed everything." "You changed everything for me too," Gideon said. "I thought I was content living alone in the mountains. But now I cannot imagine going back to that life. You are my home now." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, Ophelia slept without nightmares, without worry. She slept peacefully, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The next few months were an adjustment for both of them. Gideon moved into the small house behind the trading post, though he kept his mountain cabin for when he needed to trap or hunt. He threw himself into helping Ophelia with the store, using his strength and practical skills to make improvements she had been putting off for lack of time or money. He built new shelves that could hold more inventory. He repaired the sagging porch. He even sweet-talked the wheelwright into giving them a discount on a new wagon for supply runs. And he did it all without making Ophelia feel like he was taking over, always asking her opinion and deferring to her judgment when it came to business decisions. Slowly, Ophelia learned to share the burden of running the trading post. She learned to accept Gideon's help without seeing it as a threat to her independence. She learned that being partners meant both giving and receiving, that true strength came from knowing when to lean on someone else. The people of Ash Fork gradually accepted the marriage, though Martha Yates remained stubbornly disapproving. But Ophelia found she cared less and less about the gossip. She was happy, genuinely happy, for the first time in years. She had her store, she had her independence, and she had a partner who saw her as an equal. One evening in late fall, as they were closing up the store, Ophelia realized her monthly courses were late. Very late. She said nothing to Gideon that night, not wanting to get his hopes up, but over the next week other symptoms appeared. Nausea in the mornings, exhaustion that hit her like a freight train, breasts that were tender and swollen. Finally, she could not ignore it any longer. One night after dinner, she took Gideon's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I think I am pregnant," she said quietly. Gideon's eyes went wide. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. All the signs are there. I will go see Doc Brennan to confirm, but—" She looked up at him nervously. "Are you happy about this?" "Happy." Gideon pulled her into his arms, his voice thick with emotion. "Ophelia, I am thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled. We are going to have a baby." Tears streamed down Ophelia's face as she clung to him. She was terrified too, but also excited. A baby. Their baby. A whole new life to love and protect. Doc Brennan confirmed the pregnancy the next day. Ophelia was about 2 months along, which meant the baby would come in late spring. As her belly grew over the winter months, Gideon became even more protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy and fretting over every twinge and pain. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Ophelia protested when he tried to carry a crate that she had lifted dozens of times before. "Humor me," Gideon said. "I know you are strong, but I also know you have a tendency to push yourself too hard. Let me worry about you a little bit." Ophelia sighed but relented. She was learning that letting Gideon care for her did not diminish her strength. If anything, it made her stronger, knowing she had someone who would catch her if she fell. As winter gave way to spring, Ophelia's belly swelled with their growing child. She felt huge and ungainly, but Gideon still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He talked to the baby every night, his big hand spread across her stomach, telling stories about the mountains and the life they would have together. In April, when the desert was blooming with wildflowers, Ophelia's labor began. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Gideon stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping the sweat from her brow, murmuring encouragement and love. Finally, as the sun was setting, their son was born. He came into the world wailing, his tiny fists shaking with fury, and Ophelia fell in love instantly. Gideon looked down at the baby with tears streaming down his face, his expression one of absolute awe. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did that." "We did that," Ophelia corrected, too exhausted to say more. They named him Gabriel Hartford Fletcher, honoring both her father and his. He was a big baby, over 9 pounds, with his father's dark hair and what Ophelia suspected would be his father's blue eyes. He was also loud, making his wants known with impressive volume. The first few months were exhausting. Gabriel was a demanding baby, wanting to nurse constantly and rarely sleeping for more than 2 hours at a time. Ophelia was overwhelmed and sleep-deprived, snapping at Gideon more than once when he was only trying to help. "I am sorry," she said one night after a particularly bad day. "I do not mean to take it out on you, I am just so tired." "I know," Gideon said, taking Gabriel from her arms. "Let me walk with him for a while, you get some sleep." Ophelia wanted to protest, wanted to say she could handle it, but exhaustion won out. She fell asleep almost instantly and woke 4 hours later to find Gideon still pacing with Gabriel, the baby finally sleeping against his broad chest. "You have been up all this time?" she asked. "He finally settled about an hour ago," Gideon said softly. "But every time I try to put him down, he wakes up. I think he likes hearing my heartbeat." Ophelia's heart melted. Watching her massive mountain man husband gently cradling their tiny son was one of the most beautiful sights she had ever seen. "You are a good father," she said. "I am trying." Gideon looked down at Gabriel with such love that Ophelia felt tears sting her eyes. "I want to give him everything I never had: security, love, a stable home." "He has all that and more," Ophelia assured him. "He has 2 parents who love him and each other. That is more than most children can say." As Gabriel grew, Ophelia found a new balance between motherhood and running the store. Gideon took on more of the physical work while she handled the accounts and customer relations. They hired a young woman named Sarah to help in the store a few days a week, giving Ophelia time to spend with Gabriel. It was not always easy. There were days when Ophelia felt overwhelmed by the competing demands of business and family. Days when she missed the simplicity of only having to worry about herself. But then Gabriel would smile at her, or Gideon would wrap his arms around her from behind and press a kiss to her temple, and she would remember how lucky she was. When Gabriel was 6 months old, the 3 men who had threatened Ophelia nearly a year ago rode back into town. They brought friends this time, 6 men in total, all looking for trouble. They stormed into the trading post one afternoon when Gideon was out making a supply run, their guns drawn and their intentions clear. "Remember us," the tall one said, his eyes hard. "We have got some unfinished business with you, lady." Ophelia's heart pounded as she instinctively moved in front of the back room where Gabriel was napping. "You need to leave. Now. We are not leaving until we get what we came for. You are going to give us everything in your cash box and half the supplies in this store. Think of it as payment for the disrespect you showed us last year." Ophelia's mind raced. Her rifle was behind the counter, but there was no way she could reach it before they shot her. And even if she could, Gabriel was in the next room. Any gunfire could wake him, could put him in danger. "Fine," she said, hating the words even as they left her mouth. "Take what you want, just do not hurt anyone." The tall man grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "That is more like it. See, boys, she just needed to be taught some manners." As the men began ransacking the store, Ophelia heard the back door open quietly. Her heart leaped. Gideon must have seen their horses outside and come in the back way. She kept her expression neutral, not wanting to tip off the intruders. "You know, I do not think we should leave any witnesses," the scarred man said suddenly, his hand dropping to his gun. "This lady knows our faces." "That seems unwise," Gideon's voice came from behind them, cold as winter ice. "Seeing as you are outnumbered." All 6 men spun around to find Gideon standing in the doorway to the back room, his rifle pointed directly at them. But he was not alone. Sheriff Kendrick stood beside him, along with 3 deputies, all armed and looking deadly serious. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff ordered. "You are all under arrest for attempted robbery and threatening a citizen." For a moment, Ophelia thought the men might actually be stupid enough to draw. Then the tall man cursed and dropped his gun. The others followed suit, their faces twisted with anger and frustration. As the sheriff and his deputies rounded up the men, Gideon crossed the room to Ophelia and pulled her into his arms. She was shaking, adrenaline finally catching up with her, and she buried her face in his chest. "I was so scared," she whispered. "Not for me, but for Gabriel. I know." Gideon held her tight, his voice rough with emotion. "But you are safe now, both of you are safe." The sheriff came over once the men were secured. "Sorry about that, Ophelia. We have been tracking these men for weeks. Heard they were asking about your store in the next town over and figured they might be coming back for revenge. Gideon here alerted us when he saw their horses outside." "Thank you," Ophelia said, her voice still shaky. "All of you." After the sheriff left with the prisoners, Gideon checked on Gabriel, who had somehow slept through the entire ordeal. Then he came back to where Ophelia was sitting, still trembling with reaction. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling in front of her. "I am now." She cupped his face in her hands. "Thank you for coming when you did. I do not know what would have happened if you had not." "I will always come for you," Gideon said fiercely. "Always. You and Gabriel are my world. I would fight an army to keep you safe." "I know you would," Ophelia said. "And that is why I love you." That night, as they lay in bed with Gabriel sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them, Ophelia thought about how much her life had changed in the past year. A year ago, she had been alone, convinced that independence meant doing everything herself. Now she had a husband who supported her dreams, a son who filled her days with joy, and a newfound understanding of what true strength really meant. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon asked, pulling her close. "How lucky I am," Ophelia said. "How you came into my life and showed me that accepting help is not the same as accepting charity. That love is not about weakness or dependence, but about choosing to share your life with someone." "You taught me something too," Gideon said. "You taught me that being strong does not mean being alone. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see your vulnerable side." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, their son sleeping peacefully beside them. And Ophelia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. The trading post continued to thrive under their joint management, becoming known throughout the territory as a fair and honest establishment. Gideon's hunting and trapping skills supplemented their income, and together they were able to save enough money to expand the store and buy a small ranch just outside of town. Gabriel grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's eyes and his mother's stubborn determination. When he was 3, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter Emma was born on a crisp October morning. She was smaller than Gabriel had been, with auburn hair like her mother and a sweet disposition that charmed everyone she met. 2 years after Emma came another son, whom they named Samuel. He was the wildest of their children, always getting into mischief and keeping them on their toes. But he was also affectionate and funny, filling their house with laughter. The small house behind the trading post became too cramped for their growing family, so Gideon built them a new home on their ranch. It was a sprawling, comfortable place with room for all 3 children and any future additions. Ophelia loved it instantly, loved the way the windows let in the morning light, loved the big porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. Running the trading post, managing the ranch, and raising 3 children kept them both busy, but they always made time for each other. Date nights became a regular tradition, with Sarah or one of the other women in town watching the children while Ophelia and Gideon rode out to their special clearing to reconnect and remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. "You ever regret it?" Ophelia asked one evening as they lay under the stars, their 15th wedding anniversary just a week behind them. "Giving up your solitary life in the mountains for all this chaos?" "Not for a single second," Gideon said, pulling her closer. "You gave me a life I never dreamed I could have. A family, a home, a purpose beyond just surviving." "You gave me the same," Ophelia said. "You showed me that I could be strong and still accept help, that I could be independent and still be part of a partnership, that I was worthy of love." "You were always worthy of love," Gideon said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You just needed someone stubborn enough to prove it to you," Ophelia laughed. "Well, you are certainly stubborn, almost as stubborn as me." "Only almost," Gideon teased, and Ophelia swatted his chest playfully. As the years continued to pass, they watched their children grow into capable, confident adults. Gabriel took over much of the ranch management, proving himself to be a natural rancher with his father's practical skills and his mother's head for business. Emma surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Ash Fork and bringing education to children who otherwise would have had none. Samuel, true to form, became a lawman like Sheriff Kendrick before him, using his wild energy to chase down outlaws and keep the peace. When Ophelia turned 50, the trading post had been in operation for over 40 years and had become an institution in Ash Fork. She and Gideon gradually handed over more responsibility to their children, though neither of them ever fully retired. The store was too much a part of who they were. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sun set over the desert, Ophelia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first night when Gideon had stepped out of the shadows to help her, to building a life and family together, to growing old side by side. "Do you remember the night we met?" she asked. "When those 3 men were threatening me and you showed up out of nowhere, how could I forget?" Gideon said, taking her hand. "I took one look at you standing there with your rifle, so determined not to show fear, and I thought you were the most magnificent woman I had ever seen." "I thought you were interfering," Ophelia admitted with a laugh. "I was so angry that you made me look like I needed help." "You did need help, whether you wanted to admit it or not. I know that now. But it took me a long time to learn the difference between needing help and being helpless, between accepting love and accepting charity." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being patient with me, for not giving up even when I pushed you away. You were worth fighting for," Gideon said simply. "You still are." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their 3 children and 7 grandchildren gathered for their weekly family dinner. The house filled with noise and laughter, with children running and adults talking over each other. It was chaotic and messy and absolutely perfect. Ophelia watched her family with a heart full of gratitude. She thought about the young woman she had been, so determined to do everything alone, so convinced that accepting help was weakness. If she could go back and tell that young woman what the future held, she is not sure she would have believed it. But she had learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that true strength was not about doing everything yourself. It was about knowing when to ask for help, when to lean on others, when to let yourself be vulnerable. It was about building a partnership based on mutual respect and love, not control or dependence. She had learned that love was not charity. It was not about one person being strong while the other was weak. It was about two people choosing to face life together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating each other during the good times. It was about being equals, partners, a team. And she had learned all of this from a mountain man who had seen past her prickly exterior to the lonely, scared woman beneath, who had shown her that she could be fierce and independent while still accepting love, who had stood beside her for over 3 decades, through every challenge and triumph. Later that night, after their children and grandchildren had gone home, Ophelia and Gideon lay in bed together. His arm was around her, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They fit together perfectly after all these years, their bodies knowing exactly how to curve into each other. "I love you," Ophelia murmured, the words as easy now as breathing. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Gideon replied, his deep voice rumbling through his chest. "You are still the most magnificent woman I have ever known." Ophelia smiled in the darkness. She had built a good life, a life full of love and family and purpose. She had kept her father's trading post thriving while also building a home and raising children. She had proven that a woman could be strong and independent while also being a wife and mother. She had shown that accepting help did not make you weak, that love was not charity, that partnership did not mean giving up yourself. And most importantly, she had learned that the greatest strength of all was allowing yourself to be loved. As she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by the quiet of the desert night, Ophelia Hartford Fletcher knew that she had lived a life worth living. She had faced every challenge that came her way, had built something lasting and meaningful, and had found a love that would endure beyond her lifetime. She was content. She was happy. And she was exactly where she belonged, held safe in the arms of the mountain man who had shown her that accepting love was the bravest thing she would ever do. The story of Ophelia and Gideon became legend in Ash Fork, passed down through generations. People told their children about the stubborn woman who ran the trading post alone, until a mountain man showed her that strength and love could coexist. They told stories of partnership and respect, of two people who had built a life together, without either one losing themselves in the process. And every time someone new came to Ash Fork, struggling with pride or fear or the belief that asking for help meant admitting weakness, someone would invariably tell them about Ophelia Hartford and Gideon Fletcher, about how she had been too proud to accept help, and how he had shown her that love was not charity but partnership. The trading post stood for another 50 years after Ophelia and Gideon passed, run first by their children and then by their grandchildren. Above the door, someone had carved a simple message that captured everything the couple had stood for: strength in partnership, love in action. And in the clearing 10 miles north of town, where a mountain man had once brought a stubborn woman to watch the sunset, wildflowers bloomed every spring in a riot of color. Local legend said they bloomed there because of the love that had been shared in that place, love that had transformed two lonely people into a family that would span generations. It was a good story, a true story, a story about pride and partnership, about learning to accept help without losing yourself, about discovering that the greatest strength was found not in standing alone, but in choosing to stand beside someone who saw you for exactly who you were and loved you anyway. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Ophelia and Gideon left behind. Not the successful trading post or the thriving ranch, but the example of what real partnership looked like, of what it meant to love someone fiercely while still respecting their independence, of how accepting help was not weakness but wisdom. They had lived their love story in the wild frontier of 1870s Arizona, but the lessons they learned and the example they set would resonate for generations to come. They had proven that even in the roughest, most unforgiving environment, love could flourish if two people were willing to be vulnerable, to support each other, and to understand that accepting help was not charity but simply love in action. And so their story ended not with sadness but with joy, not with regret but with gratitude. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The mountain man and the proud woman who became partners in every sense of the word, showing everyone who knew them that the greatest adventures in life were the ones you shared with someone you loved. In the years that followed their passing, their great-grandchildren would sometimes ask about the couple in the old photographs, the stern-looking woman with auburn hair and the massive man with piercing blue eyes. And whoever was asked would smile and say, "That is Ophelia and Gideon. Let me tell you about how they fell in love." And the story would be told again, passed down one more time, ensuring that the legacy of the woman who was too proud to accept help and the mountain man who showed her that love was not charity would never be forgotten. It was a story of the Old West, of survival and strength and stubborn determination. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple. A story about two people who found each other against all odds and built a life together that was richer and fuller than either could have built alone. And that, in the end, was the best story of all.